It's 2008 and struggling writer-director Hwang Dong-hyuk, inspired by the Survivor games he encountered in stories like Battle Royale, Liar Game, and Gambling Apocalypse Kaiji, begins work on a script of his own. The project doesn't get very far, however, and Hwang eventually shelves it. He felt the story was too bizarre, too unbelievable to appeal to audiences of the day. Well, fast forward a decade or so, and it's now 2019. 11 years later, and the world is a little weirder, a little more bizarre. Audiences are now ready for stories that might have once been considered unbelievable. Hwang returns to work on the project that would later be known as Squid Game. It's not long before it's greenlit and put into production by Netflix, and on the 17th of September 2021, Squid Game is unleashed upon the world. The rest is becoming history. Hwang, it seemed, was right about audiences finally being ready for Squid Game. In just a matter of weeks, it had become a word-of-mouth sensation, topping charts on the platform all across the globe. And it isn't showing signs of slowing down either. As of writing this, it's currently on pace to be Netflix's biggest international hit to date. Like the rest of the world, I quickly found myself caught up in its gravitational pull. I watched it, it left its mark. So I watched it again. And the series, its mood, its characters, its set pieces, all of what I had just experienced and then re-experienced continued to linger in the forefront of my mind for days after. I was left to marvel at how deftly Squid Game used the violence of the death game to anatomize the series' theme of economic exploitation and social inequality. I loved how stylized and cool the shot composition was, and how tense and excited each game made me feel. But above all, what I kept coming back to was how compellingly it managed to establish and foreground its characters and their struggles. It was the treatment of humanity, and by extension the theme of humanity itself, which was the heart of the series. It was that which gave Squid Game its life beyond just a weekend's binge. So let's talk about it. Squid Game opens by following the misadventures of the seemingly hapless protagonist Sung Ji-hyun. In the series' formative beats, we find Ji-hyun seriously down on his luck, owing in large part to a mountainous debt that he has incurred by borrowing from both the banks and a rather unsavory bookie. At 47 years of age, he has the dubious distinction of still living at home with his elderly mother, and is surviving off of handouts dispensed by the long-suffering parent. At one point, he even resorts to stealing from her so that he can continue to feed his gambling addiction. He is also the father of a 10-year-old daughter who he clearly loves, but whom he doesn't get to see very often. And when he does, it tends not to go as planned. After a particularly harrowing day in the life, Ji-hyun is approached at a subway station by a suave stranger who makes him a proposition. "Let's play Jackie," he says. If Ji-hyun wins, the stranger promises to give him 100,000 won. But if Ji-hyun loses, he has to give the stranger the same amount, or alternatively be slapped in the face if he is unable to pay. As the game concludes, the stranger gives the now red-cheeked Ji-hyun a card with a phone number on it. He says, "Call that number if you want to play a game for higher stakes." Later, Ji-hyun, now desperate, decides to play some more games, and eventually winds up drugged and unconscious in the back of a minivan. Upon waking, he discovers that he's now player 456, part of a group of people that, like himself, are all heavily in debt, back in the outside world. All have come, lured by the promise of easy money and quick answers to their problems. After agreeing to take part in more games, the group are herded up a flight of Escher-esque stairs, before finally emerging onto a mysterious playing field. There, a giant doll leads them in a game of red light, green light. Those who win will advance to the next round. Those who lose are shot to death. The die has now been cast, the pieces are now in place, let the madness begin. Except, it doesn't begin. Generally, with productions and stories of this nature, the why and how the players get there is less of a concern than actually getting them there. Once the game begins, they don't stop. Like a runaway locomotive, the narrative continues to pick up steam and momentum. And as it does so, we can develop characterization through techniques like flashbacks and the interpersonal relationships that develop between the contestants. This will provide context for their actions and the decisions made while playing the game, therefore adding further weight to the spectacle of the game itself. It is, in essence, characterization in service of spectacle. And while this type of storytelling can work if executed correctly, oftentimes I feel it leaves the development of character feeling somewhat incidental or as something of an afterthought. So in episode 2, titled Hell, when the game does stop, it runs completely in counter to what we are conditioned to expect as an audience. After a narrow vote, the players elect to walk away from the game and are returned to their lives in the outside world. What follows in the rest of the episode is a pretty harrowing account of the precarious lives of a group of marginalized people and the motivations that drove them towards this perilous game in the first place. I found this to be a particularly daring narrative twist, as the temptation after an explosive opening episode like Red Light, Green Light might have been to ride the lightning into another similarly violent and explosive round of games in an effort to hold the audience's interest. Respecting the audience's attention span enough to let it breathe was a fantastic subversion of expectation, as by choosing to step back from the spectacle, Squid Game opts to instead raise the stakes of its story through a focus on humanity rather than bombast. So when the pressures of the real world become too suffocating and the players decide to participate in the game once more, that decision to do so is exponentially more impactful because of the diligence the series has put into developing its cast up to that point. You can almost taste the desperation in the characters as they are left with no other alternative than choosing to exchange one hellscape for another. They've bought in, and we have too, as we've become acutely aware of what is really at stake through our time spent in hell. Ji-yoon is at risk of never seeing his daughter again, and his mother cannot afford the urgent medical treatment that she so desperately needs. Sang-woo is facing jail time and the prospect of his mother losing her home and business because of him. Kang Se-byuk is seeking the financial freedom that would allow her to take care of her brother and hopefully get her mother out of North Korea. And Ali needs the money to support his wife and child and help them return to Pakistan. Squid Game's second episode's success, and by extension the series as a whole, is in making the characters feel tactile. It makes them feel rounded, and it makes the consequences of potential failures or even success that much more dreadful. It allowed us to buy into them empathically, as we now have an emotional investment in both their survival and success. As we move beyond hell and back to the games themselves, we go there with a much richer understanding of our cast of characters. Now, all that is not to say that hell completely absolves the characters of fallibility or personal responsibility. Humanity is not a monolith, and neither are the characters in the show. They are capable of making selfish decisions just as easily as they're capable of making selfless ones, and all are still at least somewhat complicit in their own decision-making process. Ultimately, the series wants to create uncertainty in the audience by leaning into this realm of inconsistency. For example, take Sang-woo. He can share his cell phone with Ali and pay for his bus fare home, but he can also steal from his clients and put his mother's financial future at risk. What the game seeks to do is test the limits of humanity's capacity for both virtue and self-interest, and ponder which breaks first. This struggle is perhaps best personified in the ever-evolving dialectic that plays out across the span of the series between the pragmatist Sang-woo and the more naive Ji-hyun, and also in the amazing and heart-wrenching 6th episode, Gangbu, which, might I add, Lee Jung-jae's acting in that episode was fucking incredible. So what does happen if you strip away all social niceties, all those neat little fictions that we observe and cling to on a daily basis? Are people really nothing more to one another than warm bodies, or are we greater than that? Are we truly capable of something better? Well, Squid Game, right to the very end, rather than offering us a definitive answer on this treatise on the human condition, chooses a rather more complex and open-ended approach. It neither wholly condemns humanity nor wholly celebrates it. Its message can be read both pessimistically as an outright denial for any hope of redemption, or positively as a cautiously optimistic assertion that true virtue can and does actually exist. So as frustrating as that can be, at the end of the day, it's up to us to decide for ourselves what we think its message is. Anyway, that's all I got for now. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and consider sharing this video, as it really helps get eyes on the channel. This is my first non-anime related topic I've covered on this channel, so I was initially quite nervous about choosing to cover Squid Game, but I enjoyed this series a lot and hope to return to Squid Game again in the very near future, as there are still several other elements of the series I feel are worthy of exploration in their own right. Anyway, let me know what you thought of the series or this video. Until next time, bye bye, love you, bye.